Can you take a hardwood slab, turn it into islands, and then surround them by resin? That was the question I got one day on a phone call from a potential client out of Hawaii. My reply was, let me get back to you. I called him back the next day after thinking about it overnight and told him I believe I have an idea. He said, great, let's give it a shot. So I got to work. Welcome back to another episode. My name is Jeremy Elkins with Untreated Art. Although I've never made strictly an island piece before, I have played around with a concept that I thought would work good for this design. By using electricity and a water solution, I'm able to burn rivers into a solid hardwood slab. Now typically these rivers end up being small in nature and not deep or wide. But I found that if you keep applying electricity even after the rivers have formed, they will continue to burn and can create those wider and deeper channels. Normally for the estuary design, I use this practice and burn a large central river down the middle and then tributary rivers that flow into it. I thought that for an island design, I could use the same concept but burn wide rivers throughout the entire slab and not just in the central area. I had never done that before, but I did think it was possible. I also thought it might be better to use two separate slabs so you have a gap in between the two instead of just one solid slab. My idea was it might give more separation in between the islands so they're not all clustered together. I wasn't able to control the electricity to design specific island features, so I just let it spread on its own and then chose the channels I wanted to burn out to make them wider, creating the islands. It was really hard to tell what it was going to look like at this point because it's completely burned and charred and you can't see the individual features, but I just had to trust the process. I allowed the slab to dry back out after the burning process, and then I was able to start removing the charred wood to get a look at the islands. I noticed right away that most of the rivers were deep enough and wide enough to work, but I still couldn't tell if there was islands formed or if it's just going to look like wide rivers. My plan for the resin is to add in a heavy amount of mica powder, which gives it the color. By doing that, even if there are some shallow areas, the heavy mica powders might mask it and make it look deeper than it really is. After all, I wasn't sure what to expect, and this was just one big experiment. You may have also noticed that I only partially burned the second slab, and that's because I'll be cutting into a circle before pouring the resin, so I only needed that small piece done. After removing most of the burned wood, I was able to see the individual islands and got excited about the results. This was working better than expected. I went ahead and trimmed the two pieces to make it into a circle and then started to get ready for the epoxy pour. I left the diameter about 1.5 inches wider than it needed to be because I plan on retrimming it after the epoxy cures. That way I didn't have to worry about the form being a perfect circle, it just needed to be close. I made the epoxy form out of a flexible vinyl baseboard wrap and then applied silicone to seal everything off. All of this is on top of a sheet of polypropylene plastic which doesn't bond to resin permanently and can be popped off when finished. The silicone also doesn't permanently bond to polypropylene, so that can be peeled away once the epoxy cures. This mango hardwood was pretty lightweight, so I was worried about the slab starting to float in resin, and I put some blocks down with a wood beam to keep everything in place. This will be a single pour with the resin, so I went with a deep pour resin from easypourepoxy.com so I didn't have to pour it in layers. Now usually when designing water features, most clients order a blue shade of resin, but for this client they wanted something more exotic and went with red, which I was happy to do. For me, it keeps it interesting because I make a lot of pieces and most of them are blue, so it's fun to mix it up time to time. I mixed in 7 different shades of mica powders, everything from a dark maroon red to a black and silver. Ultimately, this base resin will be a prominent red, but I wanted to have different features of slightly off colors added into it. I also mixed up 3 separate batches of red resin, some lighter, some darker, that I'll mix in towards the end of the pour. The reason why I add in so many different shades of pigment into the resin over different periods of time is to give it the appearance of depth and movement. If I were to use just one shade of pigment to get that color of red, It may still look good, but it's not going to have the look and feel of flowing water. Once I'm finished pouring the largest areas of resin, I come back and start filling in the channels in between the islands. I'm careful not to fill them up all the way because I still have additional colors of resin to add in, and I'm going to be doing a top layer of clear about a 1/4 inch thick. The clear resin will help protect the resin art when I go to surface the top, but it also adds depth to the islands, exposing parts of the burned edges around the islands. This will give them the appearance that they're sticking out of the resin, as you would see on an island in the ocean. At this point, all the mica powders are still mixed together and they haven't started separating out yet, but they will because this is a deep pour resin with a very low viscosity and they will settle over time. Later on, I'll come back and manually mix them back up after adding in the auxiliary colors, which will give it that look and feel that I'm after. For the first auxiliary color that I'm adding in, I went with something lighter than the base red, almost has a pink tone. I spread it around pretty evenly across the top surface, but I don't mind when it's thicker in some areas than others because it makes the resin art a little bit more complex. The table I'm pouring on is completely leveled out and flat, so when I pour a little thicker in some areas, that will self-level and it won't be an issue of having a high spot in one area or the other. After I'm finished with this lighter red, I move on to a very prominent red and start pouring that in the same areas. At first, these auxiliary colors I'm adding in seem to overpower the base color of the original red I had poured, but once I mix them in manually, they'll blend together to create a new unique red for the final finish. I also still have to keep an eye on the level of the resin to make sure there's enough room for the clear at the end, but these are small amounts of additional auxiliary colors I'm adding in, and it's not going to fill up over the top of the islands. When choosing which colors I want to add in, I have to imagine all of them blended together to get the final red that I'm after. And that's exactly what I did when I mixed up the base resin and the separate auxiliary colors. If you're trying to use this approach and you're not sure what the final color is going to look like when they're all blended together, you can try a separate test batch ahead of time, which will give you a really good idea what to expect. In addition, each auxiliary color is made up of the original 7 mica powders I got for the base red, and then I added in additional colors to lighten them or darken. That way, each one is not too far off of the base red I started with. When starting out mixing colors into your resin, I'd recommend simpler is better, but as time goes on, you'll get the experience and start to understand how they can mix together to create unique colors. After pouring in the 3 auxiliary colors of resin into the base red, I start to mix it manually using a popsicle stick. It doesn't really matter what you use to mix it up, but these are cheap and you can throw them away when finished. As I'm mixing this together, you can start to see the overall color change from a darker red to a lighter red, but it still has all those original tones from each color I poured in. My goal isn't to have it look like I manually stirred it, so I do this early enough in the cure process that they will continue to blend on their own and settle down, creating a more of a natural look. After mixing, I went ahead and poured a clear layer of resin about a 1/4 inch thick over the top of all the mixed resin art. Now you can see that the epoxy is level to the top surface of the wood, and it gives the islands the appearance that they're sticking out of the red base resin. Deep pour resin takes around 1 week to fully cure, but once it's done, I can pop it off of the polypropylene sheets using wood shims and a hammer. It doesn't take much effort to pop it loose, just a few shims all the way around, and it comes off the top surface of that polypropylene sheet. If you don't have access to sheets of polypropylene plastic, you could use polypropylene tape or house wrap tape. Now that it's cured and popped loose, I can go ahead and surface both the top and bottom flat with a router surfacing machine. This uses a 2-inch cutting head with 3 carbide blades on it, rotating at a very high RPM and traveling at a low speed. Afterwards, I went ahead and used a router with a jig to create a perfect circle, removing any excess. The surfacing machine leaves behind step-over lines, although very faint, and they're easily removed using 80 grit with a direct drive sander. Once all the heavier marks have been sanded out, I switch it over to dual action with the same 80 grit and then switch it to random only with 80 grit. Although each step in that process is using 80 grit, the sanding marks are getting smaller each time I move to a different type of sander. Now I can continue on with the random orbit and work my way all the way from 80 grit up to 400 grit dry sanding. I recommend that when you get to around 220 grit, you start cleaning off the surface in between each pass. This will help keep the sandpaper from gumming up with that fine epoxy powder. When you get to 400 grit, this will happen every single time, even with a brand new sanding disc, so it helps prevent from leaving those marks behind. Using a hand router, I go ahead and round off the edges both on top and bottom with a 1/4 inch bevel. I don't normally use a router to give a bevel on an edge, but on a circle table, it's much more accurate than using a hand sander. I will still have to go back and sand those edges, but it'll be ready for 400 grit, which is much tougher to leave flat spots on a beveled edge. I find that a 1/4 inch bevel still looks pretty sharp, but helps protect the edge from damage or protects those who might run into that edge. One of the final steps is to raise the grain using water. When you sand up to 400 grit, the grain is going to feel really smooth, but it's misleading because there are a lot of grains that are knocked down, and if you were to apply the finish without raising it and resanding, it's going to feel rough. So essentially, by using water, I'm kind of pre-finishing it and raising those grains, and then I'm able to sand it back down. Now I can go ahead and brand the bottom and flip it over and get it ready for the final finish. I'm using an oil wax combination finish, which if you've watched any of my other videos is a favorite of mine. But what I really love about it is how it brings out the natural beauty of the wood grain. It basically just gives off the appearance of the wood being wet and doesn't change the color at all. In addition, it's a real robust finish, meant for hardwood floors, and it takes a lot of abuse. It's also both UV resistant and water resistant, which helps prevent stains and fading over time. Depending on the density of the wood species you're using, it may take multiple coats to get a good final finish. Generally for hardwoods, I like to apply 3 to 4 coats before calling it good. The first coat is the most important as it soaks into the wood grain, and I add a lot of it, allowing it to continue to soak in until there are no more dry spots. Then you can wipe off the excess and allow it to cure. After around 24 hours, you can rough up the surface with a Scotch-Brite pad and apply the next coat. This process is repeated for each coat, and you can apply as much as you want until you're comfortable with the level of your finish. After the final coat, I come back and wet sand and polish out the resin areas to give it a high gloss look. This is a long and tedious process that starts at 500 grit wet sanding, ends at 8,000 grit before you move on to the buffing compounds, which usually I have to work through around 4 of them to get the final high gloss appearance. The final results give you a matte finish on the wood and a high gloss finish on the resin, which gives you that great contrast between the two. By polishing out the resin, it makes it crystal clear, allowing you to see through the clear resin on the top down into the colored resin art below. This is where you really get to enjoy all the effort put into the resin art and enjoy all the complex colors mixed together. I couldn't guarantee the client how this was going to turn out, and he took a huge chance with me. But in the end, I was very happy with how it turned out, and so was he. It was a real fun experience for myself, and I hope that you learned something along the way. Thank you for watching. My name is Jeremy Elkins with Untreated Art.